It's quite fascinating online when we talk about Pride and Pride Shabbat, how many people in the Jewish community say, but this really is nothing to do with Judaism, or Judaism has never really approached this topic other than to condemn it. And that really is totally untrue. Going all the way back to chapter 1 of Genesis, God made Adam in God's image. In the image of God, God made him. Male and female, God made them. That's Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. I wrote an entire 50,000 word thesis on this. Because God made them, Adam is given the pronouns them at that point. And so what does that mean? And the rabbinic texts pick up on this a lot. One midrash, for example, Bereshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, chapter 8, says, God said, let us make Adam in our image, in our shape. And Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Eliezer says, when the Eternal created Adam Harishon, the first Adam, Adam was created as both genders, which is why it says male and female, God created them. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says, when the Eternal created Adam Harishon, God created Adam with two faces, one on each side, and God split them along the middle, forming two backs. And then they challenge him and they have a discussion. But this idea that Adam is male and female together, they really wrestle with. And so this idea is is this a physical being with both male and female, or is Adam just dual gender? That Adam is them, created by God as them. And as I wrote in my thesis, that's not an absurd thing to think. Because in Judaism, particularly in Torah theology, the closer you get to God, the closer you get to mixture. The human realm is very separated in Torah's theology. But the closer you get to the divine realm, the closer you get to mixture. And Adam Harishon, the first human being, was human, but not really human. Was the start of the human race, but was a divine being, and therefore carrying dual gender. And so it's really interesting that the first human being, according to not just Torah, but also Midrash, may well have been dual gender. We assume Adam is male because the name Adam is a male name. But Adam Harishon, the first being, is a better translation, or the first earthling, is an even better, I would say, translation. Adam coming from Adamah, the earth. That first being was possibly dual gender. And even when it comes to topics of homosexuality themselves, people very often take a very orthodox perspective and say, well, Judaism just condemns. But that's way too simplistic, in fact, really way too simplistic. When you look at Leviticus 18, you'll find most people will say, well, that is just a blanket condemnation of homosexuality. But there are very many authors who say, no, you're misinterpreting it here, actually. That what you see here is a condemnation of homosexual men having intercourse with heterosexual men. And the usage of the verbs in that particular verse in Leviticus 18 suggests that. Or that it can't be done for power, that a man can't own another man through intercourse. And you may ask, why is he only talking about men? It is rather interesting that Judaism didn't really see female homosexuality for quite a long time. It didn't understand that it existed. And that's a whole separate discussion as well. But when it comes to homosexuality and homosexual intercourse, even there, Judaism speaks in many voices. Because the Jerusalem Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin has a wonderful story, a really important story. Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi once goes up to the attic in the study hall and he sees two men having intercourse. And they say to him, Rabbi, make note that you are one and we are two. In other words, in order to witness something in Judaism, you need two people to witness it. And so he is just one person, so he can't be a reliable witness. He can't then turn around to anyone and say, look what these two men were doing. Whereas these two men turn around and say, we're actually witnessing this, you're not. And so this serves as a rather interesting lesson, which is basically stay out of the bedroom. And this is a really important lesson, I would say, particularly for certain religious groups today who think that God is intimately involved or should be intimately involved in what happens in the bedroom in terms of condemnation. And I don't think that's appropriate at all. Even if, and I don't believe this, even if you believe that Leviticus 18 is a condemnation of homosexuality, or at least of homosexual intercourse, even if you believe it, there's nothing you can do about it anyway, because you're not there watching it, witnessing it with other people. And so there's nothing wrong with people of the same gender embracing each other, kissing each other, anything like that. The issue is actually when it comes to intercourse. And you shouldn't be watching. And so mind your own business is what this text from the Jerusalem Talmud essentially says. Now, of course, we can turn around and say, but that's just ignoring the issue. The issue is there's still condemnation. But as I said, I don't believe there is. I believe that that is a lens through which texts like Leviticus 18 were read, because that was the assumption of so many people at the time. But I think when we look at the Hebrew, when we look at the verses, and particularly the verbs, we see that this may be pointing to something else. And even if that's the case, even if we're wrestling with what does it say, does it condemn, does it not condemn, ultimately I think the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Berachot on page 19b really tells us something important. It says, Shema Mina, come and learn. So great is human dignity that it supersedes a negative commandment of the Torah. So great is human dignity that it supersedes a negative commandment of the Torah. In other words, even if you believe that the Torah says do not do this, more important is protecting human dignity. And that's what we do at Temple Beth Shalom. That's why we have our Pre-Shabbat service this evening, because we want to celebrate people. We want to bring people in. And even though the rabbi and others don't read this condemnatory text as condemnation at all, what is important for us in Judaism is that we are all created in God's image. And that goes back to that first Adam Harishon being created with dual gender. I think it's time for us in the 21st century in Jewish communities to get beyond certain gender questions. I think we should be studying Jewish texts to see how, in fact, Judaism is far more nuanced when it comes to the issue of gender and the issue of homosexuality. What we should be doing is supporting people. Everyone who comes in, as we say, come as you are. Come in because you are created in God's image, and therefore you teach us something just by your being here. And so we want to celebrate you. So we invite you to come to our Pre-Shabbat service this evening, remembering some or all of these texts and others that we've studied together in our Torah study over the years. And indeed, tomorrow's Torah study, since it is July the 4th, a day when some people threw some tea in the harbor or apparently did something very questionable that brought about world freedom, etc. However you want to interpret it. I'm obviously not biased because I'm British. Obviously, you can hear that. Instead, we're going to be looking at nationalism and patriotism. What does that mean in Judaism? And I'm deliberately bringing texts that are going to be challenging. They're going to be very challenging because Jewish nationalism and patriotism is a really interesting thing. What does it mean to be a Jew living in America? Because there's questions of living in the diaspora, living in exile. And can we celebrate? Should we celebrate? That's going to be something that we discuss. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for our service this evening, for our Torah study and service tomorrow. And I hope that you are able always at Temple Beth Shalom to come as you are. And I wish you Shabbat Shalom.